this was a card that I put together yesterday, and this was what I was going to do today. And then I thought, do you know what? Everybody's seen the beautiful viola as a viola as it is. There's got to be other ways of using it. So that's what I'm doing today. But on this particular one, I don't know whether you can see, but I did do a background, and I used just shades of grey on the background. You can just see it in the background, and then I layered up this top flower, which I'd done a few weeks back on a live, and said I'll use that on another card. So I've used it on another card. But I think actually what I could have done was raised this flower up quite a little bit more, so perhaps triple layer the sticky pads on the back so that you would actually be able to see more of the grey one on the background. But you can see here that I've used the script stamp out of the textures stamp set. I'm just so pleased that it's come back, because it is just one of the most versatile stamp sets that Lisa has in her armoury. It is just brilliant. I've used that in the background, so that's this one here, just to give it some interest really, and the rest is really simple. So I used the bubble squares to cut it all out. But we're not making this one today because it's boring. It's samey. Everybody's used the viola like this, so don't want to do that one. So I'm just going to put that to one side. I'm going to do something just different with the Viola stencils and an embossing folder, etc. So if I just run through what I'm going to be using, obviously I used the texture stamps on that card that I made yesterday, but the three main stamps that I'm using are these. So I'm using the checkered cloth, which again is a welcome return. Morning, Kerry. It's a welcome return to the fold, this one, as is the postcards from the edge. And then I'm using the ticker phrases, the DL stamp set. Fabulous set of stamps with some lovely little sayings in. And if you put them on your platform and stamp them all together in one colour and then cut them all out, and then do it in a different colour and cut them all out, you're going to have loads of sentiments ready in different colourways that you can just dip into and use as and when. So again, a very lovely set of stamps there. And then obviously we're using the layering stencils and the embossing folder and its matching die, and we're only using this one. I'm not using any of the rest of the stencils. I'm using this one on its own. Okay, just to show you that you don't have to use the whole of the set as such, and you can die cut it and emboss it just as easily. And I'm also using the large foliage, which again is back by popular demand, I think. Another fabulous set of dies that I adore using. One of the early sets, you can see this is number 32, so this is quite an early set of dies, but it is just so useful for so many different things. And I'm using these two today. These are my favourites. I like this one particularly at Christmas time, and if you're making wreaths and things, this one's really beautiful. And then the ferns have a totally different use, but again, a fabulous set of dies. Okay, so let's make a start then. We'll do the stenciling first. Now I'm not using number 1 because it's got none of the elements that I need on it, so we're going straight in with number 2. Now I'm only using this bit here because this is the only flower that I'm using. Alright, now the colours I'm using today are saltwater taffy. I'll say them as I go through them, and that'll give you a chance to write them down rather than me just run through a list. And I'm also using my fabulous bijou brushes because I just think they give a really lovely coverage. Now before I take that off, I am just going to go around the edges of that with worn lipstick, just to give the petal a little bit of definition. Nothing else. It's not to add colour really, it's just to give that petal some definition for when we come to cut it out. Okay, so I'm happy with that. So that was number 1. Then we're going in with number 3, and again I'm going in with saltwater taffy, but I don't want any ink in these petals here, because obviously if I'm just using one flower, I want to try and get as many flowers on this piece of card as I can. So I'm just going to cover that up so that I don't get any ink in those little apertures there. And then again I'm going in with same colour, saltwater taffy. It's not the only colour I'm using, it's just for these particular petals this was the colour I wanted to go with. And again, before I take the stencil off, I am going to just go in with my worn lipstick around the edge of those petals, just to give them some definition. And you'll see when I show you the finished flower, you'll see what a difference it makes. It just defines the edges of those petals, so they don't sort of just, they look a little bit flat without any shading, if I'm honest. And I just think if you're going to just use the one, if you're going to use them all really, it's worth spending a bit of time and just adding a little bit of extra detail. I mean, I'm not being particularly fussy about where I put it, but it just makes a difference on the edges of those petals. I will lift it up in a minute and just show you the full sort of effect. So now I'm going in with my second colour, and for this colour I'm using Seedless Preserves. Now it's a deep colour, so if you don't want it really, really deep, just make sure that you dab off a lot of your ink. See, there's quite a lot of ink there and I don't want it that dark. So less is more. You can always add, but you can't take it away. So just be wary of when you first add your ink, because it is a really, really, I mean, it's a beautiful colour, but you don't want to overpower the saltwater taffy, because the saltwater taffy is quite a soft, gentle colour, and if you go really too heavy with this Seedless Preserves, it will just not look right. So before I take that off, I'm going to do the same on here, but I'm going in with the same colour here, because I don't think I need to go with a different colour, because I've gone soft with the original stenciling. Then this sort of edging can go in the same colour. It's just going to stand out because it's a little bit darker. Okay. It looks nothing when you stencil it through there, but when you take the stencil away, the effect that it leaves you with, I think, is really, really lovely. So then I'm going in with number 5, and we're just going to put these in. I'm going to go with a grey on here. So I'm using Hickory Smoke, just because I wanted it to be a completely different colour. I didn't want to go with one of the two colours I've used, because the Seedless Preserves might not have shown up too well on top of Seedless Preserves. So I just wanted to use a completely different shade. That's why I've gone with the grey. And I don't think it detracts. I think it actually looks quite nice when you take it all off. And I'm not adding anything around the edges of these because I don't think it needs it. I think that's okay. Then we're just going to add the centre. I'm using mustard seed for that, because it's only a really tiny centre. But when you lift this up, if I just do it and then lift it, you will see that there's a little bit of white here. So what I did was just leave that in place and just move the card ever so marginally, and it is literally ever such a tiny little bit, just to fill that last little bit of white with colour. Okay, haven't quite filled it, but I don't think it'll matter. And then we're just going in with number 7, which is the markings on all the petals. And again, I'm going in with Seedless Preserves, because I've done the Seedless Preserves quite light on the flower. Then the Seedless Preserves I'm going to add now will stand out properly, hopefully. So when I take this off, you'll see how beautifully this seedless preserve stands out on the, especially on the saltwater taffy, but it will stand out on top of seedless preserves as well. Okay, there. I really like that. I like the colours, I like how it looks, and I think just adding that little bit of shading, if I just lift it up, adding that little bit of shading around the petals makes all the difference. You see what I mean about that shading around those petals? It just sort of lifts it away from the paper, so that, you know, it doesn't look flat. So you just add something a little bit different just to lift it. Okay, now I'm not cutting it out, but if I just show you that when you do come to cut it out, what I would do is cut that out. So you cut in, let's just do it. Just cut around your flower roughly. Okay, and then you can place your die, because you know which way up the flower is, because you can see that on your picture. So if you use your picture as a guide, you know roughly how the flower's going to sit, and then you can place your die on the top. Don't forget you're going to have that little 1mm offset, so you will see a little bit of white around it. So then you can tape that down and run it through your die cutting machine. Now obviously it's going to get rid of all this and you're going to be left with this little bit attached here, but because of that 1mm offset, you're going to have a guide as to where to cut that last little bit there. Okay, so if I just lift it up a little bit and just place that die round it, and you see here there's going to be a gap, so what you're going to be left with in your die cut is this bit here, but that 1mm offset is going to give you a guide to where to cut that last little bit, so it's not going to look odd. And then all you need to do is take that and place it in your embossing folder where it needs to be. But if you just line that up in your embossing folder like that and then run it through your machine, that's going to emboss beautifully for you. Okay, so you're only using one flower. Nobody says you've got to use it all. Okay, and you've done all that, you're going to be left with these. How cool are they? I think they look really lovely. Now I've done 5 here. I'm not going to use 5. I'll probably only use 3. Okay, so I've got all my little flowers. So those are ready for me to use on my card. So then I came to the background on my card. Now I've stamped this in VersaFine Clair, and this one's called Purple Delight. Now, not by any stretch of the imagination, looking at that, would you call that purple, because I'd call that pink. But when you stamp it, this is what it comes out like. So it is just the right colour to match those violas where I've used that seedless preserves. So yeah, that colour for me sort of complements the seedless preserves in the oxide, so that's the one I've gone with. And all I would say is, if you're stamping with VersaFine Clairs, do a test piece, because the colour on the box and the name that they give it doesn't necessarily mean that's the colour you're going to get on your card, as you can see. Alright, so all I did with this was I laid my card on my Ultimate, and I put post-it notes across here so that it didn't overstamp, and then I placed my stamp on the card, flipped my lid over, picked the stamp up, inked it up, and then stamped it down. And then I cleaned the stamp off completely and took the stamp off the platform and relaid it down onto my card so that I could line it up. It isn't perfect, takes a bit of practice. I know there are people out there that can get it perfect, but you're not going to see most of this anyway, so I really wouldn't worry about it being absolutely perfect. And you can see that I've missed little bits where the ink hasn't taken, but again, I'm not really that worried about that. So that's how I inked that up. I didn't want to do it on camera because it just takes a little bit too long to sort of line up and everything. So that's my base card. Then I did my postcard. So I'm going to do this one actually with you. I'm not going to put it up there, I'm going to put it down here, because otherwise it'll take up too much room. So let's reach my postcard stamp out. Now, when Lisa designed this, I apologise if it was Danny, because I can't remember who designed it. But when they designed this stamp, they didn't put a hard edge around it, because they didn't want it to be a square postcard. Okay, I'll just use my magnets just to hold that down. Otherwise, it's going to move and I don't want it to. So let's just make sure I'm in the right place. Yeah. Okay. So what I inked this up with was Vintage Photo. I did try tea dye, but it wasn't quite dark enough. But as I say, when they designed this, they designed it so that it didn't have a harsh edge around it. So when you stamp it, you'll see that there is no line around the edge. And they did that for a reason. Okay. Don't need that again. Move that out of the way. So instead of it having a hard line around the edge so that it actually looks like a postcard, you can make it a little bit more, what's the word, grungy, if you like. What I'm going to do next is, I'll just get rid of that stamp off there because I don't need it anymore, is I'm just going to spray the back of this with water. This is quite a thick card. I've had this in my stash for ages and ages, but it's the perfect sort of card for sort of vintagey, grungy sort of work, but it's quite thick. Okay, so I've sprayed the back and I'm just letting that water soak through into that card a little bit. Not too much, because I don't want it actually really soaking wet. What I want it to do is just break down those fibres a little bit to help me tear it. Okay, and I'm going to tear it towards me, and I'm going to try and do it as square as I can. Doesn't have to be. You can make it as grungy looking as you like. Okay, but you see how easy this tears now that I've wet the back of this card. And the reason I'm tearing it towards me is so that it gives me this sort of fluffy edge where the top layer of the card is coming away from the back layer of the card, if you know what I mean. You'll see what I mean in a minute. So let me just respray that. It does dry out quite quick, to be honest. So, but if I don't spray it first, it won't tear as easily and you won't get the same sort of effect. Okay, so I've gone all the way around. Like so. I'll just get rid of those bits. Okay, now it will flatten out. It's only because it's a little bit damp that it looks like that. Alright, oh look, see, my mat was wet, but it won't matter because it will add to the grungy look. Okay, in fact, to make it a little bit more grungy looking, I'll put some water down there. I will just smudge the rest, just so that it looks a little bit older. That's better. Yeah, like that. So just dry that off. And then I'm going to go round the edge of this with the same ink pad. So again, my Vintage Photo. And I'm just literally brushing the edges where I've torn it. Okay, so that it's going to give it that sort of weathered look. Yes, I know you do, Natasha. It's your sort of trademark, isn't it? but it's really quick, really easy, and just wetting the back of the card just makes the tearing a lot easier. If your card's thinner, you might not need to, so you could start it and see how easy it is to tear. And if you're finding it difficult, just spray the back with a little bit of water, and it just breaks down the fibres enough to make it easier to tear. Okay, so I'm quite happy with that. I actually don't like that edge. It's a little bit too pointy for me. That's better. Okay, so that's my postcard, which is going on top of my card here. Okay, now I am going to layer that up. I'm just hoping my pads stick to this because it is still a little bit damp, but they should be okay. So if I just add these on here, I couldn't do this in advance. I did do another one, but when I'd done it I didn't like it, so that's why I've decided to do it with you and show you exactly how I did it. And that's going on top of my card there. All right. Okay, so I'll just pop that down there like so. Now if you wanted to, you don't necessarily need to use the whole of the postcard. You can rip it in half if you wanted to. Like I used the same postcard stamp when I did my rag book. I used the same postcard stamp and ripped round the edge, and then I ripped it in half, and I also sprayed it with I think it was vintage photo spray, just so that it looked really grungy, as if it had been in a puddle, and ripped it in half and then glued it to the cover of my book. So you don't have to use it all. You could use several images and just use bits of them all over a card or a project or whatever. But for me it just made the cover of the book. The books, I think the books are still in stock. I don't think there's many, if there are any, but they are fabulous books. And the papers that are in them, these are made in India, I think, and they're handmade papers. And they take ink, they take paints, they take pens, pencils, pastes, you name it, it will take it. I mean, this was a double page just background that I did. Haven't done anything with it yet. In fact, I haven't done anything in this book for absolutely ages. But you know, when I do it, I lose myself a little bit, and it is so mindful making stuff like this. It's incredible, and they're such lovely books. The texture of the paper when you work on them is just fabulous. But that's another story. Back to the card. Okay, so I've put my postcard down. It looks nice and grungy, which is what I wanted. And then I can add all my other elements to it. Okay, so I've used the Ticker Phrases sentiments, which I've stamped out in the same colour ink, but I think it looks completely different to the colour that's on the white card, because this is on cream card. It depends what sort of card colour you're working on as to what your colour looks like. It's very similar, but just, you know, not quite the same. I did stamp it in several other colours, and this one here, this one's stamped in Distress ink. But if you look at the difference, I think the VersaFine Clair will give you a cleaner stamp, because the Distress ink isn't really meant for sentiments. It's okay for like general stamps, but when you're stamping to the sentiments, it can tend to give you a bit of like a rain effect image. So it's not a crisp, clear image if you're using Distress ink. They will work, but you just have to be cautious and perhaps overstamp a couple of times. Okay, but there are several different colours there. And again, I've stamped the 3, well 4 if you include this one, because I wanted to colour match to my background. Okay, so just be aware of the difference in colours. So I want to put my flowers down. As I said, I'm only using 3, I think, because I think 5 will be a little bit too much. And I'm putting those in the corner down here. So I just put those to one side and I use those on something else. But I didn't want to leave it at just the flowers because I think that looks a little bit flat. So I'm going to add my leaves. Okay, so I've stamped these on the same cream card, and then I've lightly brushed over the card with crushed olive, so Distress Oxide crushed olive. And then I've also used some Copic markers to just add my lines, and also my Jelly Roll pen just to add the white highlights. Okay, so once I'd done all that, I wanted to shape the leaves. So I'll just move that to one side. I shaped my leaves with my ball tool, but this just shapes them sort of like that. So they've got a is it concave curve on them. And leaves don't curl like that, do they? They sort of curl inwards. So again, what I did, I'm just going to move that, was spray the back lightly with water and then pinch the leaves up in the middle so that they curl both ways. Okay, so I'm just putting my finger on the top and rolling the leaf around my finger so that they have more of a shape to them. Can you see the difference? And then I've already done this one, but I think they just give the leaves that little bit of shape to them so that they're not totally flat and they look a little bit more realistic on your card. Okay, so then we can add those to our card. Just move that out of the way. Now I'm going to put my leaves down first and then I'm going to add the flowers on top. So I want this one to curl round here, and I really want it so that it doesn't overhang the card. The card is a 5x7, just because really the Viola stamp and embossing folder set is a 5x7 set. So I just wanted to use the 5x7 card to show you that you don't have to make huge cards. You can just make smaller cards, which obviously is perfect for our US friends, because I know they use a lot of sort of 5x7. Now I rescued my 3D glue, so I am adding 3D glue on the back of these leaves because I don't want them to be flat. Having gone to the trouble of shaping them, I don't want to then lose that shape by adding them flat onto the card. Okay, so I just pop that down there. They will seat themselves, and then do the same with this set. Now you might remember that when I came to use this 3D glue gel, it was just solid, and all I've done to rescue it really is the piece of solid glue that was at the top, I've pushed it back inside the tube because I couldn't get it out, because it's just one of those physical impossibilities, to be honest. You can't pull it out in any shape or form, so I've just pushed it back. Okay, so then I'm just going to add this one down here. I'm just going to let it fall, land where it falls, so that it looks quite natural, but those leaves sort of sit properly rather than going totally flat. Now obviously I've embossed these flowers, but I am going to add a little bit more shape because I don't want these flat when the leaves aren't flat. Okay, so then you've just got to decide how you want your flowers to look, really. And just place them as and where you want them. So let's put this one down first, and again I'm using 3D glue gel because it gives me a little bit more control over height, and I can shape it a little bit better than I can with pads. So let's just add that one down there, And then we've got a guide as to where we can place the other two. Okay. So we'll just add the flowers wherever you fancy. There's no right or wrong way. There's, you know, I know they're one way up on the set, but nobody knows they're from a set, do they, unless you tell them. Okay, just put the lid on there. And then add my sentiment. And as I said, this came from the ticker phrases. And again, as I say, I stamped it in exactly the same colour as I've used on the background. Okay. But what I wanted to show you was that although the set comes like this, you don't have to use it like that. You use it exactly how you want it. It has more than one life, you know. You can use it, you could just use these two. I haven't included the leaves, but I could have done. I could have just inked the leaves up and used these leaves instead of these. But I just particularly like this leaf set, this foliage set. I just think it's perfect for so many different projects. Although it's new to some people, it's quite an old set of stamps. So the postcards, the ticker phrases, the textures and the checkered cloth, they're all old product brought back to TV because they've been so popular. Thank you so much for joining me. I really do appreciate every single one of you. So have a lovely weekend and I'll see you very soon. Bye for now.